Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 3.15. World War II changes the world. These are also the last notes for this semester. This all aligns with the third section on your Unit 3 study guide. Now, you have control over the lecture. Make sure you're using that study guide to help you figure out what's important to take notes on, to pause and write down your questions, and rewatch if you need to. Now let's go ahead and get started. So what were the lasting impacts of World War II on the world? Well, let's look at it partially by region and take this step by step. First, let's look at Asia. The peace agreements made by the US and the Soviet Union in Asia drastically changed the rulership of different territories there. With extremely different views on government and the economy, essentially the totalitarian communist dictatorship that the Soviet Union represents versus the capitalist democracy that the US represented, these two countries could not peacefully coexist in neighboring countries that they had split. So in those places like Korea and Vietnam, there were tensions, especially when the people in those countries wanted to reunite into one country, but there were two very different conflicting governments in charge. So eventually this actually ends up leading to the Korean and Vietnam Wars, which are part of the Cold War and we will look at in the second semester. In Europe, based on the agreements, so that was Asia. Now in Europe, based on the agreements made at the Yalta Conference by the Big Three, a United Nations is created. This is a group that was very supported by FDR, that allows every member country to have one vote regarding international issues. So any recognized country in the world can petition to join the United Nations, and they can then have a say in how the nations deal with one another. So it was based on the premise of the League of Nations that, remember, President Wilson had supported at the end of World War I, but the US never joined. Well, this group works to find solutions to international issues. Their goal is peace in the world. They do have a little bit more power to carry out their decisions, and all of the world powers, including the US, joined this group. Now, the UN has the General Assembly, which is made up of all of the member countries, and all of them get one vote. So every country gets one vote in any decisions they make. In addition to that, there's also this group called the Security Council. And the Security Council has 11 members. Of these 11 positions, 5 of those are always on the council. They're permanent members of the council. The other 6 are voted in by the General Assembly. Those 5 permanent members, I bet you could probably guess who they are, were the Allied powers. Those 5 permanent members of the Security Council are the US, the Soviet Union, France, Great Britain, and China. Now, each member of the Security Council has the power to veto any decision made by the General Assembly. So while the primary purpose is to keep world peace, those 5 countries do have veto power over any decision made. So if one of them says no, it doesn't happen. With the support of the UN, there were also trials held in Europe and Asia for war crimes, including those committed during the Holocaust and the Bataan Death March. The Nuremberg trials, which are the ones that put the Germans and Nazi members on trial, were held in August of 1945 in Nuremberg, Germany. It actually included testimony by Holocaust survivors. At those trials, 36 Nazis were sentenced to death and 114 were sent to prison. Those similar trials that happened in Asia were held in Tokyo, where 7 different leaders of the Japanese military were sentenced to death and 18 to prison. So some of the Bataan Death March survivors actually testified at those trials. So World War II was over. We had the trials. We punished those who did things they shouldn't have done. Do we now have world peace? Do we feel better and are we at peace? Well, yes, but it wasn't lasting. So the world was at peace. Those peace agreements made at Yalta and in the Pacific were not going to last. The severe differences in beliefs about what is the best way to run a country, what's the best economic system, those would soon lead to the Cold War, which was essentially a war between democratic free markets and communist dictatorships. And that's going to mean that eventually we will not be at peace anymore. In addition, the war had changed America as well. Minorities, women, African Americans, Hispanics, they all began to demand better treatment and more rights, and that led to change at home and abroad. And some of that change at home, this is kind of the precursor to the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. So America would take a leading role in the coming fight, just as they had in World War II. They're going to take a leading role in the world, and we're going to see a lot of change at home. So they'd saved the world, and now they were responsible for its future and for moving forward. So that's the end of Notes 3.15. Hopefully you learned something, and I will see you in class today, or tomorrow.